Hello. Northwest Indiana Regional Planning Commission is the council of governments and metropolitan planning organization for 41 municipalities and 3 counties in Northwest Indiana. Are your elected officials from Lake, Porter, and LaPorte counties and cities and towns all are part of the commission, and we work together to ensure that Northwest Indiana has a coordinated planning process for transportation, economic development, and the environment. Today, we are presenting to you our draft Northwest Indiana 2050 Plus Plan, which is our long-range metropolitan transportation plan. In this plan, you will see presentations on roadways, the environment, active transportation, transit, and land use in the region, and what we would propose would look like in 2050.
Part of the Northwest Indiana 2050 plan is the active transportation section. We have hired a consulting firm to undertake this process for us, and this part of the presentation will go over the recommendations of this particular part. Now, there are 3 major components that describe this chapter, and the first part being finding meaning. In the active transportation section, there are 6 major areas that are focused on in the finding meaning area: review of existing active transportation networks, a detailed review of off-road multi-use trail networks, a discussion of 15-minute city concept, an overview of community input results, which include survey replies and a visual preference survey, destination locations, and road opportunities. As for the review of the existing network, the plan outlines the trails that have been built at this time, as well as those that are being planned to build. And it looks at those proposed corridors and a 2-mile catchment around there that this project that this part of the plan is looking to analyze in detail for future investment in our region. 15-minute city concept is also elaborated upon, and in this regard, talking about areas that are a 15-minute walk or a 5-minute bicycling commute from community centers throughout the region. This is in line with international standards of comfortable biking and walking within particular regions, not only in this country, but throughout the world. And we are also trying to focus in on new developments that are within this 15-minute concept. There were a robust amount of community input that was detailed during this timeframe, primarily through an online survey. Some of the results follows here. The first one being, what are the most important improvements to a particular community? And in this case, when it comes to non-motorized transportation, we see better sidewalks in cities, followed closely by more trails. And the sidewalks, of course, have always been a concern in many communities. Many sidewalks are broken or incomplete. Of course, trails are a product that when they are constructed, usually communities want more of them. And of course, we have in third place here, just under 50% paths along highways that connect destinations in cities and towns, which is very important since most of our major highways in Northwest Indiana do not have paths alongside them for safe bicycle or pedestrian travel. There's also a visual preference survey that talked about different treatments of roadways and how this worked for people who looked upon these during the survey and got their feedbacks. We have side path analyzation here, talking about how a side path would interact with a particular road corridor. And these examples were shown, and then scores were tabulated. And this also included surveys as well for multi-use trails and other types of treatments in roadways. There's also a look at the destinations within Northwest Indiana as well, and these were highlighted, as well as city centers, and finding out how it overlaid with our existing network of trails of this region and how these systems can be extended to these destinations, so more of our region can be accessed safely by bike or by ped. And also road opportunities were analyzed in detail, looking at different typologies depending on the actual size and traffic volume of the roads themselves. As you can see, this is just an example of several that are in the plan that talk about different types of roadways and their characteristics, the type of infrastructure that would be included to help them be safe for bike and ped use, and user markets as well, and who would be using those in general when they are actually developed. The creating purpose part of the active transportation network gets into the actual network itself and mapping these network routes throughout Northwest Indiana that not only include trails, but also on-street routes. So this is the proposed network. It's very involved, covering the 3-county region of Lake Porter, LaPorte. And you can see all the routes that are identified here. Most of these routes are on-street routes that you see in the yellow or orange. The green are the trails in this region, either built or proposed. And these are detailed throughout the plan, and also other ideas are brought up regarding each of the routes, regarding endpoints, regarding connections on these routes as well. And this is highlighted through the plan and on the maps in the document. And the final part of the active transportation section is involving purpose-driven planning, where we have 2 major goals set here, with is implementing the network itself, talking about the on-street system in detail, trails and side paths, and wayfinding, as well as policy recommendations. Regarding the network itself, we have on-street design options, and there are several here that are explored and talked about in detail, and how they can be applied to different contexts within the region. They can be, of course, dealing with high traffic volumes. They could be dealing with also existing facilities that may or may not be present for bike and peds to use, and how they can be improved accordingly for their safe passage. And here are some other types of uh, network designs. Of course, trails being a very familiar element within Northwest Indiana, but side paths and even some bike lanes being not as familiar and being explored through this document. Wayfinding, which is also signage, is explored in some detail as well, and the importance of good wayfinding to get people through the region safely. And then several tables of policy recommendations that are replete throughout the back part of this very chapter, talking about different roadway corridors, different streets. This is just one example in the Hammond, Whiting, East Chicago, Gary vicinity of a number of streets that are analyzed that could be converted to a complete streets, or to a street that safely accommodates biker peds. And it does talk about different destinations along these street corridors, barriers and challenges along the way. And then at the very right side of the chart, recommended infrastructure that the community should investigate when they are out there looking to improve these particular areas to help make them more accessible and safe for non-motorized users. And that concludes this part of the 2050 plus plan.
NWI 2050 plus freight chapter looks at 5 goals related to freight. The first goal is to enhance freight systems' contribution to economic competitiveness and growth. Now, this goal has 3 objectives that the plan looks at. Number 1 is to coordinate with economic development agencies, the Northwestern Indiana Forum and Connexus Indiana, to provide freight-related industries with relevant resources, including freight data, planning resources, and funding opportunities. Number 2, to collaborate with economic development agencies and educational institutions to advance training programs with a focus on freight industry workforce development. And number 3, identify and promote the development of land that is appropriate for freight-related industries. So, as you can see on this map, the freight system in Northwestern Indiana is extensive. There are a lot of Class 1 railroads, as well as short line railroads, an extensive trucking network, 4 major maritime ports, and a bunch of pipelines as well in our area, connecting some of the refineries and terminals. Additionally, in the Northwestern Indiana e-commerce report from 2020, NERPC looked at 5 possible clusters for investing in a major e-commerce warehouse or distribution center around the region. 1 in northern Lake County, 1 in southern Lake County, 1 in northern Porter County, 1 in central Porter County, and 1 in northwestern LaPorte County. And we've actually already done a sub-area plan for Gary in cluster number 1. So as you can see, we're already making a lot of progress in the area of freight. The second goal in the freight element of Northwestern Indiana 2050 plus is to reduce and mitigate freight safety and security risks. Now, in this goal, there are 4 objectives. 1, to reduce the incidence and severity of truck-involved crashes. 2, to reduce highway rail grade crossing safety and trespass risks. 3, reduce conflict between freight and active transportation modes. 4, ensure that safety concerns are not disproportionately clustered in disadvantaged communities. So we're looking at this map here. This is showing hotspots of rail casualties that occurred in the recent years in our region. And as you can see, unfortunately, there were a lot of rail casualties that occurred at grade crossings, especially in the northern portion of the region, particularly in the Hammond, East Chicago, and Gary urban cores, where we saw either injuries or fatalities at these at-grade crossings. So that's something that we look to address in the future. The third goal related to freight in NWI 2050 plus is to reduce and mitigate barriers to efficient mobility. Now, there are 4 objectives in service of this goal. 1, to reduce the number and duration of blocked crossings. 2, to eliminate truck bottlenecks. 3, to eliminate bridge clearance issues. And 4, to support dredging and ice breaking activities at maritime facilities. So here's a map of some of the train counts and blocked crossings in the region. And as you can see, there's a heat map of where there are a lot of crossing incidents, and those are predominantly clustered in the northwestern portion of our region, particularly in Hammond near the state line. Also, you can see where the daily train counts are highest at these crossings, and those tend to be scattered throughout the region. But clearly, there's a big problem that we need to address in the northwestern portion of our region in the Hammond area, and that's what this plan will help do. The 4th goal in service of the freight chapter is to maintain, preserve, and extend the service life of existing infrastructure. And there are 3 objectives that relate to this goal. 1, maintain pavement and bridge condition in a state of good repair. 2, increase capacity and accessibility of truck parking. And 3, to identify and address infrastructure condition issues disproportionately clustered in disadvantaged communities. So we actually did a study of where the truck parking spaces are in our region, and it's actually very interesting. Only 12% of the truck parking spaces are in public areas, and 88% are held on private properties like service stations and truck stops. So while on paper there are 4,472 possible spaces for truckers to park, only 538 of those spaces are in public areas, and the vast majority, or 3,934, are held in private areas where the truckers might be expected to patronize an establishment. So there are kind of some strings attached to parking at those locations. And because of this, we have a problem with truck parkers using local community streets, and that's spilling over onto our road network. So that's something that we're looking to address. And then the next goal related to freight is to preserve natural and community resources by reducing negative environmental impacts. And there are 3 objectives that relate to this goal. 1, support demonstration and deployment of technologies and strategies to reduce environmental impacts associated with freight activity. 2, to conduct a hazardous materials commodity flow study to identify and mitigate the risks of spills on supply chain flows, communities, and the environment. And 3, to conduct a regional infrastructure vulnerability study to identify and mitigate threats to system resiliency. So this chart looks at the number of hazardous spills in northwestern Indiana from 2011 to 2021. And it's concerning that in 2021, we actually saw the most number of spills in that 10-year period, the most recent year that we have data available for. And as you can see, it's very concerning that railroad in particular had a lot of spills in 2021 by mode, but the roadway system consistently produced a number of spill events throughout that whole 10-year period. And we don't have many spills related to either pipeline or watercraft or maritime freight, but those are still an area that we're monitoring. And so putting all this together, the freight chapter looks at some project recommendations that projects should address gap areas in the following areas. 1, bridge clearance. 2, toll booth inefficiency. 3, noise pollution. 4, at-grade rail crossing safety. 5, bridge condition. 6, safety issues with low-cost solutions. And 7, traffic signals. So I'm just going to go through a couple of the example projects that we came up with here that could, in theory, be implemented. The first project that the study recommends is for improvements to the US 30 underpass just east of US 41 in Cherville. This is this underpass. It has a less than 16-foot clearance. In fact, it's only 15 feet 0 inches, as you can see in this image, which means that it's a low clearance issue. And this is a facility on the National Highway Network, meaning that there are a lot of trucks that might want to use this corridor. And as you can also see in this picture, there's absolutely no room on the sides for any other users besides motorized vehicles to get through, like bicycles and pedestrians. So an example project would be to raise this bridge and also widen the underpass. And to do that, we're ballparking the estimate at about $25 million. Another example project that is in the freight chapter of NWI 2050 plus is to remove toll booths from the Indiana toll road. Now, we didn't cost out the removal of every single toll booth because we're just one region on the entire east-west toll road. But we estimated that to remove each toll booth and replace it with open road tolling, like they have in many other states, would cost about $1.5 million per toll booth. And most of this cost is actually in the operational costs over time of administering the open toll system, of checking the users and making sure that everybody pays on time. So those are just a couple examples of the projects that are recommended out of the freight chapter of NWI 2050 plus. Thank you.
This is the regional land use and housing portion of the 2050 plus plan. And I'm going through a number of analyses and results that is really helpful for our region. So we set a few goals here for our plan. The regional land use and housing element, including 3 parts. The first one is finding meaning. And in this one, we summarized all the trends, relationship, and observation that help us to frame the directions of the next step on planning for Northwest Indiana. So it includes existing land use patterns, population trends, and community planning efforts, their comprehensive plan, any future land use. We also reviewed all of this plan. The second part, it's creating purpose. And in this part, we focus more on qualitative analysis and evaluating all the facts using regional guidance and policy. So in this one, we include the issues and uncertainties, a development vision, the land use principles, and focus areas. The last one here, which is the third part, purpose-driven planning. And this one, we established an attainable population future for Northwest Indiana. And we also identified basic assumptions and concepts to help the region attain that future in a connected, equitable, and environmentally sustainable way. In this section, we identified the overall development, which include housing and environmental focus, and also the exurban area and agricultural conservation. We looked at transportation corridors and build-up areas. In this slide, we identify a number of goals that we really need to achieve, and that's coming also as part of the 2050 plan that was adopted in 2019. The first goal here is to plan for the needed infrastructure. We would like to support walking, bicycling, and transit of historic downtown areas and the older retail corridors with conductive development patterns, specifically for non-motorized. The second goal here is to identify regional approaches that address shared economic and social resiliency. Also, we wanted to be prepared for the challenges and also make sure that having environmental protection and restoration, and also how to work with the workforce development and housing. The third goal here is to identify key roadways, which include state and highways and arterials that can be reimagined to enhance the livability of Northwest Indiana communities. The fourth one is focusing on transit-oriented development. And we would like to support in our plan also the development of the TOD by the NICTI and the Regional Development Authority, and how those can fit with our regional plan. Number 5, which is the concept, we thought it will be very helpful to use the plan for the 15-minute city. And in this concept, it envisions a city developed of districts in which people can perform 6 essential functions: living, working, commerce, health, education, and entertainment. And that's all within 15 minutes walk or bike ride. It should be with the bike about 5 minutes bike ride and 15 minutes walk. Then goal number 6 is to identify key places and corridors that need to be examined in more detail to focus resources on. The next one here is we have an overview of all the population change within our region. And we consider the population change from 1980 to 2020, which is about 40 years, to get like an accurate information about the trends and the change within our region. I'm not going to go over all the details of the numbers here, but as I'm summarizing that, like we have, of course, some loss of population in our older industrial communities. Porter County gained about 53,000 people within in the last 40 years. And also, we have a significant loss in LaPorte County. So the number here showing is the urban area in Lake County gained about 0.11%, which is about 5,000 people. The rural, actually, they lost population, but with the total is about 2,694. Porter County, they have a change of 7,000 in the urban area, and rural area also gained some population with a total of close to 9,000. LaPorte County, they lost population, but they gained more population in the rural area. And the next map will show more the details and where is the growth is happening. But overall, the growth in this 3-county area appeared to be very slow. And that's something that we thought about it during the analysis of the land use. The 2 maps here is showing the existing patterns of the one on the right here is a change in population in the 3-county area in 40 years. And as we see, the great a change happened, or they gain more population here around Valparaiso. And also we have Winfield, we have some in Millerville area and Crown Point and St. John, all of the dark area. Even the orange area, they gain some population, but it's not like the dark burgundy color. With the housing units, it's very much going the same. Like the population, except for the Valparaiso area, but it changed here as we see it's still in St. John and Winfield. We have significant housing increase in this area. The next one here, we also did like a deep, in-depth housing analysis. And in this map, we really was looking at the affordability of the housing, and that was based on the income range. So we started from about 25,000 income, the household income, and the next one up to 50,000, 75,000, and then 100,000, 150, and above 150. Just to summarize that, we noticed that all the people with income of up to 25,000, they're really lacking housing, either for renting or to buy housing. So we need about 12,000 units to just accommodate this category of income. The second one, which is also we're lacking for income between 75 and 100,000, which is also lacking about 7,000 unit for this category of income. The next one also between 100 and 150,000, we're still lacking a significant number. Even for the one over 150,000, also we are lacking about 10,000 and more housing. The only two category which we have more supply than the demand, which is income between 25,000 and 50,000, and also or we can say from 25,000 up to 75,000, we have plenty of housing here. And that's something that we need to balance. We need to have housing for all income and be affordable for everyone. The chart here showing right away if the green dot here in a white area means that we are lacking housing, either rental or home ownership. So with our analysis, it shows that the requirement for about 50,000 new residential units over the 30 years, that's what we need to add, or it's needed by 2050. And also, we wanted to increase the density of the urban development with new construction achieving a net density in the range of 4 to 5 units per acre. So that's the percentage, and I will explain that later in the different scenarios that we looked at it for population and the housing. Here's a scenario that we have a different scenario here for the land consumption. And in this one, we have like 4 scenarios. And in this one, the first one here, which is showing on the map, we have significant large single family lot. And we assumed if we are going similar to the trends that we're having now in the existing condition, which is about 65% large lot of one family. And the small lot is very limited, which is about 18%. Also, the other one, which is a multifamily and one family attached, we don't have enough of those to accommodate like the incomes that like I talked about it in the previous slides. So the second scenario here, which is about 3 dwelling unit per acre, it gives us like a balance between the large lot of one single family home and also the small lot, which is similar percentage, and we still have 10% of the one family attached. And also we have multifamily we increased the multifamily here, which is 20%. The third one, we have exactly the same amount of large lot of one family, same for the small lot of one family. And then here, the 15%, and we have more multifamily, 35%. The other scenario that we tried and we found also it's like it will be suitable. The 20% of large single family homes and 35% of all single family homes. People still prefer the single family homes, but now with the availability of land and also to make it more affordable, so we increased the percentage of the still single family homes, but it's a small lot. 20% of this is like a duplexes or something like that, and also the 25% of multifamily. So the reason actually here we selected scenario number 4 for a number of reasons. The first one, it's the most likely direction of the future housing market. That's a housing market based on analysis and research. We found that the demand now for small lots, and also they required more duplexes, townhomes, and multifamily. It is not overly dependent on multifamily or very high density solutions. which also can preserve some of the open space. It generates the lowest need for the conversion of new lands to urban uses and maintains open spaces that provide the greatest economy for public services and infrastructure. So, as a result of that, the long-term average annual growth, we calculated that based on the trends within the region. We looked at the Chicago area also as a comparison. We found that per year we have increase of about 0.55%, which is equal 900,000 population by 2050. So that's the number that we did all the calculation on our needs of commercial, residential, based on this number. It requires, as I mentioned before, 50,000 new residential within 30 years, and also it requires an increase in the urban development density. So as a result, when we decided on the scenario number 4, we looked also how we're going to distribute that. So we have like a two concept here showing the urban development and agriculture conservation, and the purple color here showing the traditional development. This is like this is an older community. There is no much changes in this area. It's already built up. It has the infrastructure. So this will be a traditional development as it happening now within the area. The second one is suburban development. And this one, it's in the new suburb area, and all the trending, the St. John, the Winfield, the Crown Point, all of this area will be more as suburban development. And the orange one, we focus more like a rural or exurban development within this area. So it will be a lower density versus the blue or the purple one. We put the potential of the interface here for growth, which is going very much with the watershed boundary. So that's we recommend that the development should be within these green line boundary. Here I'm having explanation more of the traditional centers and what's the policy, the regional policy for that is to reinforce the character of the investment in these centers, a central city area within a 15 minutes walk or biking to improve active transportation access and take advantage of opportunities to increase the population. We also have community corridors. And in this one here, we also focus on the existing major corridors within this area, which is also have some recommendation here in the map on the left, and showing also the 15-minute walk. And the red one is the city center that we should focus on. We are recommending development nodes and major nodes like the one by US 30 and I-65, and how to identify some employment centers, potential area for trail-related development and centers and corridors. So these very much what we recommend. Here, the actual report has plenty of maps and more explanation about our recommendation here for the next 30 years. Also, environmental corridors here in this concept is based on the Indiana Dune Lands National and State Parks, which are an archipelago of protected environmental resources. The northern portion include the west branch of the Little Calumet River, also Hoosier Prairie, Hobart Branch, and Deep River. So this is all showing here the green network, the dark green, the other managed area here, which include the Indiana Dunes Park. We have still the 15 minutes walk radius, which we would like to have a connection between these 15 minutes walk and the green network. And then the blue one is the Kankakee River here. That's conclude my presentation, and I recommend you to go to the report and read more and explore more about more detailed number about housing and population. Thank you.
Hello, this is the public transit element of the NWI 2050 Plus. This transit plan has a vision statement which reads, linking rural and urban residents in Northwest Indiana with more efficient and connected public transportation system will move the region into a more sustainable, vibrant, equitable, environmentally friendly, and emergent future. With the rest of the 2050 plan's guiding principles, the transit element is also looking at the principles of connected, united, renewed, and vibrant. This map here shows the transit demand index, which has to do with EJ areas, including minority population, disability population, elderly population, low income areas, and people without access to a car. The transit demand index is located in the map here. The lowest demand of transit needed in the light green areas, and then it gets the darker green means medium demand in the area. Orange would be the high demand area, and then the red would be the very high demand for transit in the area. This map also shows the existing transit in Northwest Indiana. On the top, coming south below Lake Michigan, is the South Shore line, the upcoming West Lake corridor. The other black areas show the transit that we existing have, which include Gary Public Transportation Corporation, East Chicago Transit, Valparaiso V Line, and the Michigan City Wave. I will also include that the blue areas are demand responses that are in certain areas of the region. North Township Dial-A-Ride deals with North Lake County in the blue area. Lake County Community Services provide services to the rest of the Lake County. Porter County Aging and Community Services, as well as Opportunity Enterprises and Response Transit for Porter County, and LaPorte Transport covers demand response services for the city of LaPorte. So how do we figure out what the gaps and needs are for transit in our region are? Well, we took input from the public. We had public meetings that where we talked to the public and got feedback. We also had booths at the Lake, Porter, and LaPorte County fairs where we got more input from the public. We had a public survey that went out last year, and we also gathered more data from the public about what their needs are for transit. On the professional side of things, we talked to professional stakeholders in Northwest Indiana who specialize in transit. We created a steering committee that was just for transit. It included transit operators, representatives from cities and towns that didn't already have transit, and as well as we even talked to PACE and Regional Transit Authority on the Illinois side about possible connections in the future. Throughout all of our time going through all of the gaps and needs, one of the main things that kept coming up that NERC decided to try to tackle on a regional scale was the need for connections between cities, need for connections between transit systems, and more connections across county lines. The best way that we found that we could do this and encompass all of these connections needed was to develop a regional transit system for Northwest Indiana. The first system that we developed is the grid system. The grid system follows arterial roads throughout the region. Transfers are best to be made at route intersections. It is easy to navigate, and it serves more communities than the other system we provided. Some of the downfalls of this system is that it needs a much more consistent service in order to run smoothly. There can be longer wait times depending on where your stop is, and it's more expensive to operate, would cause for a need for more buses. Since this system only goes on arterial roads, sometimes your point of interest, such as hospitals, schools, shopping centers, and downtowns, are not on the arterial roads, which would mean a much longer walk to your point of interest. The hub system, this other system that we provided, is built by demand. It uses multiple roads to meet the demands of the transit needers. Time transfers will happen at hub stations, and every route on this map is a 30-minute route or 1 hour round trip. It will always hit most of the points of interest, including shopping centers, schools, downtowns, hospitals, because it is built by demand for transit. This one also has more stops and transit in the transit demand areas from the map I just showed earlier. Some of the downfalls is that this system can be a little bit harder to navigate, need to make more transfers, and it doesn't always go down the main roads. This system also serves less of the cities and towns in the area, and there also will be a need for more transfer hub stations and build better infrastructure to make that happen. Some more comparisons we looked at for evaluating the two systems has to do with environmental justice areas, how many municipalities, municipal bus routes that it already crosses, the length of the route, how many of these points of interest, including hospitals and medical centers it does serve, higher education centers it serves, as well as if it has connections to commuter rail. This graph shows a comparison of the two systems. As you can see, there are 37 towns served by the grid system and only 32 by the hub. The local connections made of existing transit are 54 from the hub system, but only 33 from the grid system. The percentage of route traversing through high and medium demand areas is 4.9% in the grid system and 9.1% in the hub system. The hub system does serve more hospitals in that it serves 5, while the grid system only serves 4. The hub system serves 7 centers for higher education, while the grid system only serves 1. In the commuter rail with the South Shore and the West Lake corridor, the hub system will connect with 10 different stations, while the grid system will connect with 7. As I talked about earlier, the grid system is much more expensive in operating costs than the hub system. The grid system will cost $21 million roughly to service each year, while the hub system will only take $9 million each year in operating costs. As for the grid system, it will need more vehicles in order to have this system be successful. It has the cost of the vehicles that would be needed on the grid and the graph also. The hub system would need less vehicles, and it also has the cost analysis of the vehicles for the hub system. Thank you for listening to the transit element of NWI 2050 plus.
The roadways chapter of NWI 2050 plus looks at 6 goals, and they correspond to the 6 vision areas in NWI 2050 plus. The first vision area is connected, and the goal related to connected is to complete roadway, bicycle, sidewalk, and transit networks across municipal and county lines to enhance safe and efficient access to opportunities for all. There are 4 objectives as relates to roadways to this goal. Number 1, the roadway network in northwestern Indiana adequately covers the region and affords roadway users sufficient mobility and accessibility. Number 2, the roadway network in northwestern Indiana balances opportunities for working, playing, living, and learning in the region. Number 3, the roadway network extent in northwestern Indiana is not itself a major contributor to congestion. And number 4, the roadway network in northwestern Indiana fosters connections between communities without imposing barriers. So looking at a map of the 2016 regional corridor study, this was a study that NWI conducted back in 2016, where we looked at 22 missing segment gaps throughout our region that if they were filled in hypothetically with roadway projects, it would greatly improve congestion and traffic flow in our region. And we can see this map showing the high, medium, and low priority corridors of the regional corridor study. And this relates to the goal of connectivity. And it's also interesting that when we look at the 22 corridors that we identified back in 2016 as a part of that regional corridor study, 7 of them are actually advancing with federal funding through our planning and programming processes at NWI. So that's definitely a success story to look at. The second goal related to roadways is related to the United Vision area, and the goal is to prioritize transformative investments to elevate the position of the region and to attract a diversity of residents and high-quality economic opportunities. There are 2 objectives related to this goal. Number 1, northwestern Indiana's residents are able to access jobs both within and outside the region, and northwestern Indiana's jobs attract talent from both within and outside the region. And number 2, leaders deploy travel demand management strategies and transformative transportation systems management and operations investments in the region. So we looked at the commute patterns that affect northwestern Indiana commuters on a daily basis. And we can see from this diagram that Illinois is a huge attractor of commuters from northwestern Indiana, attracting over 42,000 commuters just from Lake County alone, as well as almost 6,000 from Porter County and almost 1,000 from LaPorte County. So the Illinois region is definitely a major attractor of commuters from our area. But Illinois also sends plenty of commuters that reside in Illinois to our region, including over almost 15,000 from going to Lake County and almost 1,000 going to Porter County and almost 300 going to LaPorte County. So some of the neighboring areas like Illinois, Michigan, and other parts of Indiana are still a major component of commutes within our region. Looking at the third goal as relates to NWI 2050 plus and the roadways chapter, we're looking at the vision area of renewed. And the goal here is to improve roadway, bicycle, sidewalk, and transit networks to revitalize existing urban and rural centers and enhance equity. And there are two objectives that relate to this goal. Number one, leaders prioritize maintaining roadway and highway pavements in satisfactory condition in the Northwestern Indiana region. And number two, leaders prioritize maintaining bridges in a state of good repair in the Northwestern Indiana region. So this map shows pavement conditions in the most recent year for which we have data back in 2020. And you can see that overall pavements in the rural portions of our region are in much better condition. A lot of good pavements in the rural parts of our region, but in the urban areas of our region, we see a lot more fair and even some poor segments of pavement, which means that we need to work better as a region together in fostering that collaboration in prioritizing road rehabilitation projects that can help improve these segments of pavement. Now, looking at bridge conditions in the region, we can see that overall our region does a very good job maintaining our bridges in either good or fair condition. There are several bridges in poor condition. These do tend to be off the major roads and highways and off the state system, essentially on local roads and county roads. The fourth goal related to roadways and NWI 2050 plus relates to the vibrant vision area. And this is to adopt technological innovation that enhances the safe and fluid movement of people and goods to enable a flourishing economy. And there are three objectives as relates to this goal. Number one, the Northwestern Indiana region is prepared to transition to electric vehicles by ensuring that residents have the means to access electric vehicles and that electric vehicle charging infrastructure is adequately and equitably distributed across the region. Number two, Northwestern Indiana residents and freight carriers can expect to travel at reliable and safe speeds on the region's roadway network. And number three, leaders effectively manage congestion on the region's roadway network to ensure that people and goods move fluidly in order to sustain a flourishing economy. So we actually collect travel time data anonymously from a bunch of cell phone data and pings that come in from across our region. And we can look at what the median speeds that people are traveling at on our major roads and highways. And as you can see from this map, we don't tend to experience that much congestion in general, at least on average. On our interstates, most of the time, the traffic flows at 70 miles per hour or greater throughout most of the stretches of interstate highway. And maybe even concerningly, on some stretches of US 41 south of Lowell and US 30 east of 421, even though those are not limited access facilities, traffic still moves at about 70 miles per hour. However, we do see some congestion on US 30 in western Lake County from Maryville west of the state line, as well as US 41 in the vicinity of US 30, and it's also a little bit on US 6 in the Portage area. So that's something that we need to pay attention to as relates to improving congestion on our major roads and highways. The fifth goal as relates to the roadways chapter in NWI 2050 plus relates to a new vision area this time around in the area of equitable. And the goal here is to seek to distribute access to the region's roadway network equitably and justly, as well as to ensure that leaders invest in improvements to roadways equitably and justly. So the two objectives that relate to this goal are: one, leaders seek to ensure that Northwestern Indiana region households have more equal access to vehicles. And two, leaders invest in projects and other improvements to the roadway network equitably and justly, not unduly benefiting or burdening certain communities at the expense of others. So we are looking at a map of the proposed 2024 to 2028 Transportation Improvement Program projects that we use federal funds to invest in our region. And we can see that they align pretty closely with the environmental justice areas that we've identified in NWI 2050 plus. So in general, we're doing a pretty good job of channeling federal funding to transportation projects in the areas that are most in need. However, we could strive to do even a little bit better. And then finally, the sixth goal as relates to the roadways chapter of NWI 2050 plus is in the new vision area of safe. And the goal here is to ensure that the region's roadways operate as safely as possible, with the guiding principle that any fatality on the roads or highways is one too many. And there are three objectives that relate to the SAFE goal. One, leaders seek to reduce crashes on the region's roadways. Two, leaders seek to reduce injuries on the region's roadways. And three, leaders seek to eliminate fatalities on the region's roadways. So this map shows a heat map of the fatal crashes that occurred in the years of 2015 to 2019. We always look at least 5 years of data when it comes to crashes in order to get the best pattern that we can of where these crashes are occurring, where, in this case, where the fatalities are occurring. And it's pretty clear that the fatalities tend to occur near busy interchanges, as well as in segments of road that curve and at intersections that are oblique, that is, that don't come in at right angles. So these are all areas that we need to focus on in terms of reducing the number of fatalities as we move forward in the planning process. And thank you.
Northwest Indiana 2050's critical paths highlighted steps to achieve a region that was connected, renewed, united, and vibrant. One strategy identified to work toward future resilience and sustainability, a common theme throughout these steps, was to plan for climate change. According to the Purdue University Indiana Climate Impact Assessment, by 2050, our three counties can expect to experience between 25 and 50 more days of high temperatures over 96 degrees and between 2 and 7 more extreme precipitation events per year. Some of these concerns of the future climate led to a partnership with numerous region stakeholders. In 2019, the citizens of Northwest Indiana Region Resilience, joining with Earth Charter Indiana, partnered with NWI, and we brought on board the Indiana University Environmental Resiliency Institute, 3 counties plus 13 municipalities, to inventory the amount of greenhouse gas emissions the region contributes to global climate change, to identify effective and efficient strategies the region and local jurisdictions can take to reduce those emissions, and to look at adapting and becoming more resilient in the face of climate change. Collectively, those efforts have been branded Climate Action NWI. To begin with, in 2021, we worked with 6 climate fellows from the Indiana University Environmental Resiliency Institute to create a greenhouse gas inventory baseline for our region. This slide summarizes that the source sectors that contribute to that. In general, in 2017, we produced approximately 54.5 million tons of greenhouse gases equivalents, which could be methane or nitrous oxide or carbon dioxide, but we call them all carbon dioxide equivalents to have a common metric to discuss them going forward. As you can see from the slide, industrial processes and industrial energy are the vast majority of emissions from Northwest Indiana, approximately 80%. This isn't too surprising if you look at our region, and the foundation of our entire economy is industrial processes. The next largest sector is transportation and mobile sources, which is almost 9% of region emission baseline. And coincidentally, the focus of NWI 2050 plus. So going forward to begin planning on how to reduce those sources of greenhouse gas, we try to prioritize based on 2 factors: the impact or amount of emissions generated by a source, and the amount of influence that NWI and the local governments participating would have over that source. This graphic attempts to represent that by placing different emission sources in these 4 quadrants. They may have high emissions and a high ability of local governments to influence them, or low emissions with low opportunity to influence. Those will be not included heavily in 2050 plus, but may be focused on in local climate action plans. Some of the most significant, highest priority source in this category will be transportation and forestry and trees, as having the highest emission influence and the highest ability of local governments and NWI to change. So how far do we have to go? The scientifically based targets for Northwest Indiana call for a reduction of greenhouse gas emissions of 63.4% from our 2017 baseline by 2030, and then to achieve net zero by 2050. This means a need to reduce our emissions between our baseline emissions by about 34.5 million tons by 2030, and then by 50 or so million tons by 2050. One thing we have going for us in our greenhouse gas emission reduction are the investments that NIPSCO has made and continues to make in decarbonizing their electricity generation process. As you can see, this is an example of how we forecast the future emissions with business as usual practices as well as committed reductions. So the blue bar in these charts represents electric energy, and by 2037, NIPSCO expects to be completely off of coal and heavily producing their electricity through renewables and natural gas. The result of that is the commercial and residential sectors will have significantly less emissions from that source. However, the natural gas we use to heat our homes does not experience the similar reductions. Looking at the business as usual forecast, we can see that by 2030, just with the NIPSCO investments in decarbonization and also the addition of new transit operations with the Westlake Corridor and the double track projects at NICD, with the exception of the industrial process category, by 2030, we anticipate our region will be within or approaching our 2030 target of 63.4% emission reduction, which is very exciting to forecast. On the other hand, with economic growth and population growth by 2050, we see the greenhouse gas emissions creeping up again over that 2030 target, and in fact, making the distance to get to net zero much higher. For purposes of 2050 plus, we really wanted to focus on transportation and mobile sources. They are the third highest source category in Northwest Indiana and the highest with an ability for a local government to impact. You can see here that of that sector, 70% of the emissions are generated by on-road gasoline vehicles, which are primarily your passenger vehicles and maybe some light-duty commercial vehicles. That category alone generates 3.3 million tons of greenhouse gas in 2017, which is the equivalent of 4.2 tons of carbon dioxide per person per year. I was trying to find a match for that. That is the same weight as a hippopotamus. That's a lot of carbon. As electricity emissions decrease, gasoline vehicles become a growing piece of a pie. Based on our business as usual forecast that we discussed in the previous slide, this sector of gasoline, passenger, and light-duty vehicles will grow to be 77% of the transportation sector as other areas shrink. So how can we reduce the greenhouse gas emissions from transportation? One, we can reduce the amount of travel that we drive. Many of the strategies that address vehicle miles traveled you'll find throughout NWI 2050 plus. Investments in infrastructure that make walking or biking more attractive, safe, and convenient, increasing transit availability and ridership, increasing the density of residences and destinations so that people can walk and bike more frequently for small trips. All of those would reduce the vehicle miles traveled and reduce greenhouse gas emissions. Also, as was mentioned in the freight section, improving heavy-duty parking, truck parking, and the technology available to assist drivers finding parking spaces is another example of infrastructure and technology that can reduce vehicle miles traveled. from the transportation on-road sector. The other strategy is to reduce the emissions from the vehicles, or invest in cleaner vehicles and cleaner fuels. One of the strongest investments that we can do in this sector is to increase electric vehicle infrastructure, thus speeding the transition time of the passenger vehicle fleet from gasoline to electricity to the extent possible. You can see here, this map shows the electric vehicle infrastructure charging stations that we have publicly available now in gold. And in black, you can see an additional 10 or so stations will be added by 2025 in the region. But we still have significant gaps in the rural parts of the region and also in North Lake County, where additional investments would be beneficial. Finally, in our region, with so many high-quality natural resources, it's important to talk about the ability of forests and trees to actually help us with our greenhouse gas emissions. The acres of trees in Northwest Indiana between 2011 and 2016 decreased our carbon emissions by 421,000 tons per year. Well, total, or about 112,000 tons per year, which helps to offset emissions going forward. So, and it also contributes to resiliency because trees can absorb stormwater and provide shade and reduce air conditioning demand during those high heat events. So there's a substantial portion of 2050 plus that we'll talk about natural resource conservation and enhancing our region with trees to reduce greenhouse emissions and enhance resiliency. Additionally, we've highlighted the really highest priority natural areas that we'd like to see those trees and those lands preserved to continue to absorb carbon and provide the quality of life and enhance resiliency of both our natural resources and our communities. Thank you.
When the 2050 plan was released, there were 4 key elements which envisioned our region as connected, united, renewed, and vibrant. United and connected deal a lot with environmental justice. So with the 2020 census, NWI used the 7 different factors of the environmental justice as reported by the US Census. Those 7 factors are households with persons of other abilities, households with non-English speaking persons, households with lower income, households with a minority as a head of the household, households with no vehicle, households with persons older than 65, and lastly, households with persons who are veterans. NWI collected maps, and so I'll show you these maps. This is households with areas with persons of other abilities, non-English speaking persons, areas with households with lower income, areas with households with a minority as the head of the household, areas with households with no access to vehicles. These are households that rely solely on neighbors or transit to get them from point A to point B. Households with persons over the age of 65. And lastly, households with a veteran. As you can see, most of our projects we've had are in northern Lake County, as well as northern Porter County. Those are the urban clusters of Northwest Indiana. This is a map of multiple environmental justice factors. This has got more than 4 of those 6 environmental justice factors that I showed you earlier. So this is a compilation of those, of 4 or more in an area. Next, if we do projects, we must show that we program are fiscally constrained. Basically, what this means is we can afford to do these projects. Annually, Northwest Indiana gets roughly, the 3 counties, we get roughly $30 million to complete infrastructure projects in Northwest Indiana. These are roads, bridges, trails, and we can use those however we see fit. We do have some areas that we need to be concerned with. We need to look at safety. We need to look at air quality and congestion mitigation. And then we also have other areas are STBG, which is State Transportation Block Grant. This is a wide variety. And then we have transportation alternatives. And I mentioned highway safety, which is HSIP, and CMAQ, which is congestion mitigation and air quality. What we show on this table are the 2 different areas. We have Lake and Porter County, which is considered the Chicago UZA. And we also have the Michigan City UZA, which is namely LaPorte County. The reason they're broken up is because they are not contiguous. Chicago, those are all connected to each other. All the different areas are connected. In Michigan City UZA, we have Michigan City and LaPorte, and then the area around LaPorte, those 2 areas within LaPorte County. As you can see, we mainly are annually, we are fiscally constrained. There are a couple years that, if you look at the bottom, there are a couple years which we are, we may not be. The 5th year of our program, we do not need to be fiscally constrained. And we have this as a much larger program in case a project may move out, fall out. We can slide one of these projects from 2028 forward if needed. Transit FTA, we get roughly $43 million annually for our transit in Northwest Indiana. Our transit in Northwest Indiana is the funds mainly go toward operations assistance as well as preventative maintenance. We do also provide new vehicles as needed, or help our transit operators receive new vehicles as they needed, provided they meet the requirements for age and miles on the vehicle. On the left-hand side, you see we have different categories. We have 5307. 5307 is a general category in the urban area. We have 5310, which is for seniors and other ability adults. 5337 is for rail transportation. And 5339 is for buses and bus facilities. If you notice in the Michigan City area, they are not eligible for 5310, 5337, or 5339. They are only eligible for 5307. So they are much smaller and they do not need those other funds. The Federal Transit Administration, we get those funds annually every year and we dole those out accordingly. Being they are not for projects but ongoing assistance, we are able to show a balanced budget annually.
Thank you for watching NERPC's NWI 2050 Plus presentation. Please submit your comments to comments@nerpc.org or by calling 219 area code 763-6060. To learn more about NERPC, please visit our website at www.nerpc.org.